Reformed Faces, Session 7. In our last session, we discussed the historical hymn book, Hymns of Universal Praise, 普天颂赞. In this session, we will ask the question again. So then, what hymnals do you use as Reformed churches? What about other denominations? What hymn books do they use? Well, I'm going to start with my own personal history. I grew up in a place called the Bethel Bible Seminary in Hong Kong, 伯德利神学院. And in a seminary, as well as in a church that it finally gave birth to, we sang from 伯德利诗歌, Bethel hymns. This, I'm sure, goes all the way back to the Bethel Evangelistic Band, 伯德利布道团, featuring John Sung and others, which was formed in 1931. So Bethel hymns, 伯德利诗歌, represents a revival preaching tradition with strong Wesleyan influence. For example, the theme song for the seminary is Holiness unto the Lord, 归于耶和华为圣. By the time of the 2000s and 2010s, when I was giving some guest lectures at Jin Lian Bible Seminary in Singapore, I noticed that they likewise use a revival choruses, a book of short songs. So Jin Lian Bible Seminary and Bethel Bible Seminary, in their choice of hymns, follow the same tradition of John Sung and Ji and so on. It's no accident that Jin Lian Bible Seminary began as a women's devotional school after the visit by John Sung, Song Sangjie 博士. So I grew up with the independent revivalist tradition of gospel song and revival choruses. By the time I'd reached age about 10 or 11, the high school department of the Bible Seminary had enough converts to form a youth fellowship. And so this youth fellowship adopted youth hymns, 青年圣歌, Blue Version, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, 青年圣诗, youth hymns, was the production, was the brainchild of a man by the name of William Newburn, 刘福群, 老福款 牧師. Back then in the 1960s, we had a saying that if you close your eyes and listen to this William Newburn, 刘福群牧师, preach or talk to you in Cantonese, you would think it was a Chinese, Cantonese person speaking. William Newburn had perfect Cantonese, and he hailed from New Jersey, a Christian Missionary Alliance missionary, first in Guangxi and then in Hong Kong. And of course, he would have encouraged Philip Teng, very much like many years earlier, John Layton Stewart encouraged Liu Tingfang. And so Newburn encouraged Philip Teng to put together these youth hymns, which were not intended to be a worship hymnal, because the Christian Missionary Alliance had their own 宣道诗, had their own hymn book, made up of, likewise, a lot of these mission evangelism-oriented hymns. But we sang those hymns, and finally, 5, 6, 7, and 8, the red volume appeared, 生命圣诗 5, 6, 7, and 8. And finally, 生命圣诗 Youth Hymns 3, comprising of 9, 10, 11, and 12 in an army green cover. 生命圣诗 Youth Hymns had another feature. It was bilingual. And so as a child, as a Hong Kong young person, we learned to sing many of these hymns in English, but there were only 2 verses for almost all of the hymns. Each of these volumes would have 200 titles. Finally, the Christian and Missionary Alliance published 生命圣诗 Hymns of Life in 1986. So I had my independent Wesleyan and Christian missionary influence in my youth. But I also attended a Baptist primary school, Pei Dao Pui Do Primary School, and very closely associated with the Kowloon City Baptist Church. So I attended Vacation Bible School, sometimes youth fellowship there on Starling and Road. That's a long time ago before I moved to Argyle Street. And so I was familiar with the Baptist hymnal. Now, later on, after I left Hong Kong, 宋祖新歌, a newer version, New Songs of Praise, 宋祖新歌总局山歌 was published in 1973. Its editor is Gabriel Chi, CH''I 记者生给吉桑 Reverend Chi, 1922 to 2009. I don't know his church connections, but he certainly was the editor for the Baptist hymnal New Songs of Praise. Interestingly, as I was saying, in the Swatao world, Presbyterians and Baptists work together closely. So my wife attended the Hong Kong Swatao Christian Church on the Hong Kong Island side, 香港中环中华基督教潮人说明堂, and their choir director is, as a Presbyterian church, is Gabriel Chi, who edited the Baptist hymnal. Now, for several years, I used 宋祖新歌, New Songs of Praise, because I didn't have anything else available at that time. And I found that 宋祖新歌 had a good sense of the history of hymns, a good sense of church history. It certainly included many hymns by the Puritans, by Isaac Watts, John Newton, of course, Charles Wesley, and so on. But it is interesting that in Taipei, some of the Reformed Presbyterian churches also adopted this Baptist hymnal. I suppose that they didn't choose the slightly more liberal alternative, Hymns of Universal Praise, so they probably at that point had to use the Baptist hymn book. Later on, by the year 2001, Century Praise, 四己颂赞, appeared, also Hong Kong Baptist Press, edited by Dr. Ling Ren Yang, L-I-N-G, Dr. Ling, who resided in the San Francisco Bay Area. So the Baptists had their older Baptist hymnal, New Songs of Praise, and Century Praise. The Christian Mission Alliance had the Youth Hymns and 宣道诗 Alliance Hymn Book, and finally, Hymns of Life. And by the way, the Hymns of Life have a tremendous sense of the history of hymns and church history in general. For an evangelical denominational hymn book, I find it quite amazing that many of the hymns from the early church and Middle Ages were preserved in the Hymns of Life. I could not help but wonder, would that have something to do with the fact that Philip Tang grew up a Presbyterian and had a broader historical sense, perhaps, than some of the other evangelical traditions might have bred in him? Finally, the Reformed Church. Well, in 1967, what is called the Christian Reformed Presbyterian Church Mission of Taiwan. Now, how do you get to the name? Well, I think it is because that mission was made up of Christian Reformed, CRCNA missionaries, and OPC, Orthodox Presbyterian Church missionaries from the U.S. And so their joint mission in Taipei is called the Christian Reformed Presbyterian Mission. They published a 宋祖诗歌, a blue hymn book, which included some confessions and creeds in the back. And I would use that one quite often early in the early years of the 21st century. Finally, around in the 2020s, the Reformed Presbyterian Church in Taiwan, through Reformation Publishing Company, published 天地共赞, Psalms and Hymns for Worship. The interesting part about this hymn book is that hymns number 1 to 100 were all from the Psalms. So hymns of worship, as we know them, would begin with number 101. Now, I mentioned the Xiamen Church, the Dutch Reformed missionaries that started those churches in the 1840s. Well, in the Xiamen, in the Hokkien, in the Amoy dialect, they always had a strong tradition of psalm singing. And so many of the psalms, if not all of them, were translated in the Fujian Xiamen dialect. Well, in the new hymn book published by the Taiwan Reformed Presbyterian denomination, they had 100 selections from the Psalter, but they did not share the same broader historical view of the hymns of life. I personally find that a combination of hymns of life and Tiandi Gong Zhan, psalms and hymns of worship, would make a healthy diet for a reformed confessional congregation. Again, I said in an earlier session that I adopt the view that God has given the church a rich heritage throughout the centuries, and we are free to sing the Psalms. Of course, I am one of the earliest Chinese Reformed pastors to promote psalm singing outside the Presbyterian Reformed Presbyterian denomination in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Southeast Asia, including in Taiwan Reformed churches. But I do not adopt the view that we can only sing the Psalms, and certainly I do not adopt the view that we cannot use musical instruments. So while my doctrinal stance, you might say, is rather defined or narrow, my view on music, and music is nonverbal, is rather broad. That is why I raised the question to the PCA pastor. Is God pleased with African worship? For those of us who prefer not to use a hymn book, how about you read the Psalms? Read it, familiarize yourself with the Psalms. Create new melodies, new idioms to carry the word of God and the gospel and the various teachings of the Bible into the mid and late 21st century.